Long ago, in a peaceful African village surrounded by vast green forests and flowing rivers, there lived two inseparable friends, Kojo and Tunde. They were known for doing everything together, playing in the fields, hunting small animals, and fetching water from the village well. Their bond was admired by all, but as fate would have it, a moment of anger would change their lives forever. One scorching afternoon, Kojo and Tunde were sent to fetch water from the well at the outskirts of the village. It was a long, tiring walk under the blazing sun. By the time they arrived, both boys were thirsty and exhausted. As they lowered their gourds into the well, an argument erupted over whose turn it was to draw water first. "I was here first," Kojo exclaimed, gripping the rope tightly. "No, I was." "You're always trying to take advantage of me," Tunde retorted angrily. The disagreement escalated into a physical struggle. In his fury, Tunde pushed Kojo hard. Kojo stumbled backward, lost his footing, and with a piercing scream, he fell into the deep, dark well. Tunde gasped in horror as he peered into the well. He could hear Kojo's frantic cries and the sound of splashing water. Panic gripped him. What had he done? He hadn't meant to push his friend so hard. For a moment, Tunde considered running to the village to call for help, but fear of punishment held him back. What if the elders blamed him? What if his parents were furious? As his heart pounded in his chest, he made a decision that would haunt him forever. He would pretend that Kojo had never been with him. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he quickly gathered his gourd, filled it with water, and sprinted back home, leaving his friend behind. The village's search for Kojo. Back in the village, Kojo's family waited for him to return, but the sun dipped behind the trees, and he was nowhere to be found. His mother, worried, asked Tunde if he had seen Kojo. "No, Auntie," Tunde lied, his voice trembling slightly. "I went alone to fetch water today." His heart pounded in fear, but no one suspected him. As night fell, the village elders organized a search party. Lanterns flickered in the darkness as villagers scoured the surrounding forest, calling Kojo's name. But no answer came from the well where he lay trapped. Meanwhile, Kojo struggled in the cold water, shivering, his fingers clinging to the rough stone walls of the well. He shouted for help, his voice echoing endlessly. As exhaustion set in, he prayed for a miracle. By dawn, hope began to fade in the village. Kojo's parents were inconsolable. The elders, believing the boy might have been taken by wild animals, declared him lost. The village prepared for mourning. Kojo struggled for survival. Trapped in the well, Kojo had to fight against fear and exhaustion. The water was cold, and every movement sapped his energy. He tried to grip the walls, but they were too slippery to climb. He called out until his voice grew hoarse, but no one came. Days passed. Hunger gnawed at his belly, and thirst became unbearable. Rainwater dripping from the sides of the well provided some relief, but his strength was waning. Shadows danced along the walls as the sun moved across the sky. At night, he shivered, listening to the distant sounds of the forest. Kojo began to hallucinate, seeing the faces of his family above the well. He imagined his mother's voice calling for him. Was this how his life would end? The return of hope. Fate had other plans. A wandering hunter, passing by the well in search of game, had a faint voice. Curiously, he peered into the depths and saw a pair of frightened eyes staring up at him. "Help! Help me, please!" Kojo cried weakly. Without hesitation, the hunter called for help. Villagers rushed to the scene, bringing ropes and baskets. They worked tirelessly until, at last, Kojo was pulled from the well, weak, soaked, but alive. Gasps of shock spread through the crowd as Kojo told his story. He revealed how he had quarreled with Tunde, how he had been pushed, and how his friend had abandoned him. All eyes turned to Tunde, who trembled with fear. The elders, with stern faces, demanded the truth. Unable to withstand their piercing gazes, Tunde fell to his knees and confessed everything, sobbing. The village was furious, but Kojo, despite his ordeal, pleaded for mercy on his friend's behalf. The elders, moved by his kindness, decided that Tunde would not be banished, but he must atone for his actions by serving Kojo's family for a year. Through hard work and sincere regret, Tunde sought forgiveness. Over time, the wounds of betrayal healed, and though their friendship was never the same, Kojo and Tunde learned a valuable lesson, that anger and dishonesty bring pain, but truth and kindness restore harmony. From that day forward, the well became a symbol of both betrayal and redemption in the village. Whenever the villagers gathered near it, they would remember the lessons learned from Kojo and Tunde's story. The well that had once held the boy in darkness became a place of reflection and teaching, reminding all who came near of the importance of honesty, trust, and forgiveness. Generations passed, and the story of Kojo and Tunde was passed down. And each time it was told, the villagers would pause at the well, remembering that even in the most painful moments, there was always a chance for redemption and the power of kindness to restore what was broken. Years had passed, and though Tunde had fulfilled his year of servitude, his guilt continued to haunt him. He had worked tirelessly, tending to Kojo's family farm, repairing fences, fetching water from the well. No task was too small for him. Despite Kojo's forgiveness, Tunde had never fully forgiven himself for what he had done. Kojo, now older and wiser, had moved on, his heart no longer filled with the bitterness he once felt. He had grown into a strong young man, respected by the villagers for his courage and wisdom. But he, too, carried a burden, the burden of betrayal, the reminder that trust could be broken so easily. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Kojo stood at the edge of the well, looking down into its depths. Tunde, now a young man, stood beside him, his head lowered. They had both come to the well, not as enemies, but as two souls who had been forever changed by the past. Tunde, Kojo said, his voice soft but firm, the well is more than just a place where I nearly lost my life. It is a place where I found strength, where I learned to forgive. But it is also a place where I learned that sometimes, no matter how much we want to forget, the past can never truly be erased. Tunde nodded, his eyes heavy with unspoken words. I know, Kojo. I know. And I can never undo what I did. But I hope that someday, you can look at me not as the boy who pushed you into the well, but as the man who tried to make amends. For a long time, they stood there, side by side, gazing down into the well. The shadows of the past seemed to rise up from its depths, but in that moment, they both understood that it was not the well that had held them, it was their own hearts. Only by forgiving each other and themselves could they truly be free. As the night fell, the stars twinkling above, the two friends stood in silence. The well, with its deep, dark waters, remained a silent witness to their journey, both a symbol of pain and a reminder of redemption, forever etched into their hearts. And so, the story of Kojo and Tunde continued, not just as a tale of betrayal, but as one of growth, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds that can be forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. The village would remember the well, but they would also remember the lesson. No matter how deep the darkness, the light of forgiveness would always shine through. As the years passed, the village began to see changes not only in Kojo and Tunde but also in the very air that surrounded the once silent well. What had once been a place of anguish and betrayal had now transformed into a symbol of hope, wisdom, and healing. Kojo and Tunde, though their friendship had been fractured, began to understand that true healing came not from forgetting the past but from embracing it. It was through the pain they had both endured that they had come to learn the strength of forgiveness, not only towards others but also towards themselves. After the year of servitude, Tunde had become a different person. The young boy who had once been impulsive, angry, and careless was now a man who understood the weight of his actions. He spent many nights under the stars, reflecting on his mistakes and the life lessons Kojo had unwittingly taught him through his forgiveness. But even as Tunde sought redemption, Kojo knew that healing wasn't a linear path. He, too, had moments where the old pain resurfaced, the feelings of betrayal and anger rising up like storms inside him. It was during these moments that he would return to the well, standing at its edge, as if seeking some kind of closure, some sign that he had truly forgiven and let go. Kojo's thoughts often turned to his parents, how they had suffered the loss of their only child, only to have him return, broken yet alive. They never stopped supporting him, loving him even through the darkest days. It was their unwavering support that had helped Kojo stay grounded through it all. One afternoon, as Kojo and Tunde were walking together in the fields, Tunde finally found the courage to speak. Kojo, he began, his voice full of earnestness, I owe you everything. I know that no matter how much I work, no matter how many years I spent trying to make up for what I did, it will never be enough to erase my mistake. But I need you to know, I am truly sorry. And I hope one day, I can be the kind of man who earns your trust again. Kojo paused, laying down his hoe and looking at his friend. The familiar face that had once been a source of anger was now one that reflected the same pain Kojo himself had endured. He saw not just the remorse in Tonde's eyes, but a desire to be better. Tonde, Kojo said softly, you've already done more than I could have asked for. You've worked hard, you've shown me that you've learned. I don't think there's a limit to forgiveness, but I know this, you don't have to spend your whole life trying to make up for the past. The real change is in who you are now. The words, simple as they were, carried more weight than either of them had anticipated. There was no grand moment of reconciliation, no dramatic display of emotion. But in that quiet exchange, the foundation of their renewed friendship was laid. The old scars of betrayal began to heal in the light of mutual understanding. The village, too, had changed over the years. They had seen the transformation in both boys, and in the quiet strength that Kojo and Tonde had developed, the villagers saw a reflection of their own journeys. Just as the well had once been a place of sorrow and darkness, it had now become a reminder of the village's own resilience. The elders, who had once feared for the boys' futures, now looked to them as examples of how deep-rooted traditions of forgiveness, community, and growth could foster true healing. Even the youngest children, hearing the story of Kojo and Tonde, began to understand that conflicts, though inevitable, could be resolved through patience, understanding, and a willingness to forgive. Kojo and Tonde, having learned the value of compassion and humility, became leaders in their own right. Together, they began to help other villagers resolve their differences, guiding the younger generations through their own struggles. They spoke openly about their past, never ashamed of the mistakes they had made, but proud of the lessons they had learned. In time, Kojo and Tonde became symbols of hope in the village. Their story was not one of perfect friendship, but of the struggles and sacrifices that ultimately made them stronger. When people visited the well, they no longer saw it as a place of pain, but rather as a site where something beautiful had been born, a new understanding of what it meant to be truly human. The well, now adorned with plants and flowers, had become a sacred place, not for mourning, but for reflection. It was here that Kojo and Tonde had their most profound conversations, where they shared their dreams, fears, and lessons with one another. The well had become a sanctuary, a place where the two friends could come together, not just to honor their past, but to continue building a future of trust and understanding. As the years continued to pass, the village flourished. The people lived by the example of Kojo and Tonde, learning to navigate their own challenges with grace. They had witnessed firsthand the power of redemption and the depth of forgiveness. And as for Kojo and Tonde, they were never just two boys who had fought over water, they were the living proof that even in the darkest moments, there was a path forward, and it was paved with forgiveness, humility, and love. And so, the story of Kojo and Tonde, though rooted in the pain of betrayal, became a tale of enduring friendship, a story that would be told for generations. The well, now an enduring symbol of redemption, would always remind the villagers that no matter how deep the well of sorrow may be, it could always be filled with the waters of compassion and grace. As the seasons changed, so too did Kojo and Tonde's understanding of the world. No longer were they just two boys from the village, they had become men shaped by their experiences, wiser and more empathetic than they had ever been before. Their bond, though different from what it once was, had been transformed into something deeper, one built on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared history of hardship. The passing years, filled with hard work and growth, helped to heal the wounds of betrayal. The weight of Kojo's fall into the well and Tonde's decision to abandon him had slowly diminished, but it was never truly forgotten. Every now and then, when the winds blew through the trees and the moonlight shone on the well, both of them would remember that fateful day. It was during one of these quiet moments, years after the incident, that the village chief called the two men to his hut for a private conversation. The village was growing, and with it came new challenges. People were beginning to leave their traditional homes and seek work elsewhere, and the elders feared that the old ways, those of close-knit communities, trust, and care for one another, were slipping away. "I have watched you both," the chief began, his voice steady and thoughtful. "And I believe you have learned something that many will need to hear. The village needs guidance, and I ask you to take up the mantle of leadership. Not as chiefs or warriors, but as stewards of our ways, teach others what you have learned. The chief's words struck both men deeply. Kojo, always the quiet thinker, looked at Tunde. They had both been so focused on their own growth that they hadn't considered how much they could contribute to the village as a whole. But this moment of clarity shifted something within them. They realized that their journey wasn't just about personal redemption anymore, it was about offering something greater than themselves. Teach others to forgive, to seek redemption in their actions, and to believe in the strength of their community, the chief continued. Only then will our village truly thrive. Kojo and Tunde accepted the chief's request, though they did so with a humble understanding of the immense responsibility that came with their new roles. They didn't seek to lead with authority, but with quiet strength and compassion. They began meeting with the village's young men and women, sharing their story and the lessons they had learned from their painful past. At first, it was difficult. Many of the younger villagers didn't fully understand the depth of Kojo and Tunde's transformation. They were skeptical, not knowing how much they had suffered or grown. But as Kojo and Tunde continued to lead by example, helping with everyday tasks, offering advice in moments of conflict, and speaking of forgiveness, the villagers slowly began to open up. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, a small group of young men came to Kojo and Tunde with a problem. They had fought over a disagreement about land use. One of them, Kofi, was particularly upset, having felt that his brothers had taken advantage of his hard work. "I don't understand how to make things right," Kofi said, his fist clenched in frustration. "I want to forgive, but I feel as though I am being taken for granted." Kojo, knowing the weight of Kofi's frustration all too well, spoke softly, but with conviction. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about releasing yourself from the anger that weighs you down. When you hold on to that bitterness, you're the one who suffers. You must learn to let go, not for the sake of others, but for your own peace." Tunde nodded in agreement, adding, "It's also about being honest. Speak to your brothers, but speak from the heart, not from anger. Ask them to listen, and make sure they understand how you feel. This isn't about winning or losing, it's about understanding one another." The group left that night with a new perspective, and within a few days, Kofi had reconciled with his brothers, mending the rift that had grown between them. Word spread quickly throughout the village about how Kojo and Tunde had helped the young men solve their conflict. Slowly but surely, they began to see their village transform, not just in terms of prosperity, but in the way the villagers treated one another, with more patience, humility, and understanding. As the years passed, both Kojo and Tunde often found themselves walking to the well in silence, not necessarily to dwell on the past, but to reflect on how far they had come. These visits were no longer marked by bitterness or regret, but by gratitude for the lessons they had learned. One evening, after a long day of helping to settle a dispute between two neighboring families, Kojo turned to Tunde and said, "Do you remember that day, Tunde? The day you pushed me into the well?" Tunde paused, his gaze turning inward as memories of the past resurfaced. "How could I forget?" he replied softly. "That was the day my life changed." Kojo smiled gently. "And it was the day mine did, too. I suppose we both needed that darkness to find the light. I've realized now that I don't regret what happened. I don't wish to undo it, because it's made me who I am." Tunde looked at him with a mixture of awe and respect. "I've learned the same. That well became our greatest teacher. It taught us what nothing else could." They stood in silence for a long while, the moonlight glimmering on the surface of the water. It was a peaceful silence, one that spoke of healing and understanding, of a bond that had been rebuilt from the rubble of betrayal. In time, Kojo and Tunde's story spread beyond the village. Other neighboring tribes began to hear of the two men who had forgiven one another and led their people with compassion. They were invited to speak at gatherings, to share their wisdom about the importance of forgiveness, unity, and community. And so, as the years went by, the legacy of Kojo and Tunde lived on, not just as a tale of betrayal, but as a story of hope. Their journey, full of heartache and reconciliation, became a guiding light for others who struggled with their own conflicts. The village, once small and isolated, grew stronger, bound together by the lessons that Kojo and Tunde had passed down. The well, once a place of despair, now stood as a monument to the power of transformation, where even the deepest wounds could be healed through understanding and forgiveness. As Kojo and Tunde grew older, they saw the village flourish in ways they had never imagined. Families were closer, the land was cared for, and most importantly, there was peace, a peace born not from the absence of conflict, but from the courage to confront it and move forward together. And as the sun set on their days, Kojo and Tunde, side by side, knew that they had fulfilled their purpose. Their journey had come full circle, and in the quiet moments beneath the stars, they knew they had created something greater than themselves, a legacy that would echo through the generations.